Good morning again. I'm Ross. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm glad that there's a great crew out at the coffee bar. Hope they're getting ready and will be able to be awake and listening. We are in the series called Black Box. We've been looking into our hearts and working to monitor that because it determines the course of our lives, and seeing what information we can find to help us stop crashing our lives, or at least do it less. And Sandusky, Ohio, you guys, is very well known, I believe, for two things. Number one is Callahan Auto Parts. Number two is Cedar Point Amusement Park, and in something of what might legitimately be a surprise, I'm going to start this morning by talking about the amusement park. It is a little surprise, because why wouldn't you talk about Tommy Boy? But it just doesn't fit with this message. So we're talking about the amusement park, and I've been there a couple times. I know at least one of us has been there before as well, maybe more, I don't know. And it is arguably the best and most extreme thrill park in the country. It has probably more bigger and faster rides than any other singular spot. And at least in my opinion, in certain ways at least, the most fascinating ride at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, is what's called the Power Tower. Now, the Power Tower is not a traditional roller coaster like you might think of a regular roller coaster. It's really just a great, big, straight-up tall metal tower, or really a series of four of them. And on the outside of each metal tower is kind of a metal sleeve with seats on the outside of that, and then of course the metal sleeve travels up and down the tower, naturally carrying seats and riders with it. And that's all it is, just straight up and down. There's no horizontal anything, nothing like that. But here's what I think is very unique and very interesting about the Power Tower at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, is, to my knowledge, or at least recollection, it's the only ride like this that I can think of that offers you a choice, and it really does. You have two very distinct options at the Power Tower. The first option is what's called the Space Shot. And if you choose the Space Shot at the Power Tower at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, here's what happens is, of course, you start out basically on the bottom, and then it blasts you up at some outrageous speed into what absolutely feels like the stratosphere. And it does reach an outrageous height. It's 300 feet high. You can see the roller coaster that it's by there. It is probably a pretty tall roller coaster, and it's not even close. According to my crack research, I have not yet been to Worlds of Fun, but I believe that this is very similar to what they call the detonator at Worlds of Fun, except it is legitimately twice as high. I believe that the Mamba is the highest ride at Worlds of Fun. This is a full 100 feet higher than that. And so it really is very, very high. But when you're blasting up, your brain is just kind of scrambled eggs, and your senses are all just completely gone. And so you feel like this is getting pretty high, but then you start to fall back toward the ground, and it's all okay, and it's really pretty amazing. It's one of the most fun and unique rides I have been on in my life. I've been on a pretty good number. I feel like it's as close as most of us will ever get to being ejected out of a fighter jet. It's amazing. I feel like if you go to Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, and you do not take the Space Shot at the Power Tower, I feel like you really kind of missed it. The other option, the other choice, is what they call the turbo drop. And that is a lot like how it might sound. Of course, you again start out at the bottom, you have to, but then rather than shooting you up, it just kind of takes you up to the top of this outrageous 300-foot high tower, at which point it then actually doesn't drop you down, it pushes you down at a speed that is even greater than would happen with a free fall and the force of gravity that holds the solar system together. And so to me, that sounds like a lot of fun. And so here's what happens when you ride the turbo drop at the Power Tower at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, is you get on and you can see just like this, you're facing out and your feet just kind of kicking the sky beneath you, and it starts to bring you up, and you gain really a pretty impressive view of the rest of the park or Lake Erie or whatever, depending on which side you're facing, until up until after a day of riding some of the highest and fastest rides in the country, you start to feel like you're getting quite a bit higher than you would really like to be. And so if you're like me, you look up thinking that you have to be near the top, and you're halfway. And what I think is really the most effective element, honestly, of the turbo drop is not even the height of the ride or the speeds that it travels. It's just that you're there surrounded by nothing. It feels like you're just kind of there in the atmosphere, and your feet, you can see, are free and kicking, and there's at most 3 people next to you, maybe only one person, depending on what side they put you on any kind of like traditional roller coaster. At least you have sort of the feeling of safety of the car that you're in, and if you look down, you see the bottom of the thing. You have to like look over to see actually all the way down. Probably there's somebody in front of you. None of that. And all you have to hold on to is just this shoulder harness that they put on. And so you feel like you're kind of holding on to just yourself. And you really sort of feel like you've just been picked up by the back of the neck and you're being held, just suspended there all by yourself, 300 feet above the pavement, as all of the fun and laughter and screams and chaos of the park is completely gone below you. You can look at that and see, oh my goodness. Let me tell you, I have jumped out of an airplane at 13,000 feet. I have driven 1,500 miles across the country to go to college at a place where I knew literally not a single person. I have gotten in a Tijuana taxi cab. None of those come close to the terror and horror that you feel as you are sitting atop the turbo drop of the Power Tower in Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, as the minutes like hours tick by waiting to be released. Well, what we're talking about today can absolutely take you on a ride. But unlike the Power Tower, this one only goes in one direction. In fact, this is something that, as nearly as I can tell, it has no upside whatsoever, but does have the power to destroy us and everything good in our lives. And it is, I'm certain, present in every single one of us here today. And truth be told, we like it that way. What we're talking about is pride. That is the P-ride. And what you need to know and remember above all else is that the P-ride only goes down. Now, before we get too far into this, let me try a little bit of disambiguation, because there are some ways in which we use the word pride that I think are not necessarily so bad or so damaging, and not what I mean when I say the P-ride. It's a little bit like when we talk about forgiveness, and I have to say, okay, like I mean this, I don't mean this. But when I talk about the P-ride, what I do not mean is healthy self-respect. You should have a healthy self-respect. Oh my goodness, the Bible talks about how every one of us is created in the image of God. That's an amazing thing. Even past that, in Jesus, God himself came, put on human flesh, lived, died, was resurrected so that you could be forgiven and adopted as his child and his family forever, because he has chosen to love you and put value on you. So if you think to yourself, I'm no good, I'm worthless, I'm not lovable, that is not an indication that you have successfully defeated pride in your heart. That means you're having trouble believing something that God says about you. But if you say, no, I am worthwhile, I do have value, I am kind of amazing because God created me and he puts those values on me. That is not what I mean when I say the P-ride. Similarly, the pride that you may feel in a child or your spouse or even a job well done, I think things like that certainly can become the P-ride but they are not necessarily. If you go to watch your child play ball and you're excited and really like it when they do well, but you know what? If they don't do well, you're still just as proud. That's not necessarily the P-ride. That sounds like good, healthy pride that any parent should have in their child. If you get done with the day at work and you look back and you think, well, I feel like I worked hard and I performed with excellence, and you feel that satisfaction, right? Or something like, you still cheer for your team even after they have a really tough week. Like, I think that is all, at least can be good, healthy pride. And finally, by pride, when we use that word to mean a group of lions together, that is not what we mean by the P-ride, although certainly it can take you down. So if this week or sometime in the future you feel something that you might call pride, or you think of listen, I would like for you to take a moment and evaluate whether or not that really is the unhealthy, sinful, destructive, what I'm going to call P-ride, because I don't want you to destroy anything that's good and noble in this. However, guys, when you are on the P-ride, there's no question that it will always, absolutely every time, only go down. Here's a smattering of what Proverbs has to say about pride. It says, pride leads to disgrace. I don't want to go there. But with humility comes wisdom. It says pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall. That's all bad. It says that pride ends in humiliation. Where humility brings honor, pride leads to disgrace. It goes before destruction. It ends in humiliation. To sum up, the P-ride only goes down. A little less on the Proverbs sort of end and more just writing, and not specifically using the word pride, but very clearly we'll all agree this is what this is talking about. From 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he says God chose things that the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. It's as though God has built something into the system where when we are on the P-ride, the world works against us. Some people might see things like that and just call it karma. According to this, it kind of sounds like it's really God is the one who's behind some of these things, because whatever it is that you have pride in, whether it's your appearance or your intelligence or your station in life or something that you've acquired or become, whatever it is, if you push things back far enough, here's what's happening, is you are taking credit for something that is really no credit exactly to you. And I know that might sound strange to some of us. Maybe there's even a pushback and you feel a little sting there, which that might be your pride, but you're saying, wait, hold on. You know how I got to where I am? I'll tell you how, is because I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps. I got up every day. I worked 60-hour weeks and went to night school after that to acquire what I have and be where I am. Why should I not be proud of that? It's a very fair question. We all, I think, would agree that it's ridiculous to take pride in a gift. You think of the high school kid who their parents give him a really cool car, and so then he goes around kind of feeling like he's better than everybody who's driving, their parents' car or some old junker, or maybe, some of us with no car at all. And that's great that he got a cool car, but then everyone's also kind of like talking about him behind his back, which a little bit, of course, is the jealousy that we talked about last week, but also because he didn't do anything. All he did was just accepted the gift. Like, that's no real credit to you. I mean, good for you. I hope you enjoy the car, but that doesn't make you better or any, what we all know it's ridiculous to take pride in something that was just given to you. And if we look ahead, just a couple chapters in the same verse of 1 Corinthians, it says this: what do you have that God hasn't given to you? Expected answer, well, nothing. Everything I have is given to me by God. So if everything you have is from God, why boast about it as though it were not a gift? So have you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps? Have you taken yourself off of the proverbial scrap heap and made something awesome? Good. I hope you have. That's great. I will celebrate that with you. That's awesome. Do you then kind of look down on people who maybe haven't been able to do what you have? Different story. Do you hear yourself say or even think things like, well, I don't know what everybody else's problem is. If they will just do what I did, they can get to where I am. It's the simple fact that I was working hard while they were being lazy. That's what it is. Well, in no way am I here to condone laziness. The Bible has plenty to say about laziness as well, but let's push this back a little bit. Where did that intrinsic drive and work ethic that you have come from? Did you have it instilled in you by your parents? Okay, that's good. But are you going to be prideful about who you were born to? That's not as good. Maybe you're like, well, my situation was the opposite. I came from shabby circumstances where I had laziness modeled to me, in fact. And so I decided that I was going to go and do the exact opposite and be in a completely different situation. Or maybe you say things, or you hear yourself say things like, well, you know what? That person, what they said or did or how they acted, like, I just don't have that in me to be like that. Or they didn't do the right thing. You're like, I just don't even have that in me to not be like that. And good. I'm glad for that, but it's still really no direct credit to you, is it? Because whoever or whatever it was that put that thing in you or didn't put the other thing in you, and I'm a pastor and we're in church, so I'm going to bring God into that, clearly is still no real direct credit or merit to you individually, right? You can choose to do the right things, to develop discipline and character. That's good. I hope you do those. But you do not have the ability to put anything into yourself to make you into anything other than what you were created, any more than my dogs have what it would be to make themselves into a panda. And so it is time to get ourselves off the pea ride. It only goes down. You know what, though? You know what I think is really the worst, ugliest kind of pride? Even worse than the high school kid with the cool car or the pretty girl who's mean to the less pretty girl. The spiritual pride. And you guys, spiritual pride comes at us in so many different shapes and sizes and colors and hues that I think it, no question, attacks every single one of us here, of course myself included. I think it's impossible for it not to. And so Jesus tells this well-known story recorded in Luke 18. He talks about two people who go to the temple to pray, and one of them's a Pharisee, and of course, that's the really good person. Really, that's the person who does everything right and is looked up to. We all admire this person. And the Pharisee goes and he prays and he says, God, thank you so much that you didn't make me like these other terrible people, that you made me the person who does the right things, and I give 10% of all my income to you, and I don't do the wrong things. I'm not sleeping with the wrong people or doing any of that. And then the other person is a tax collector, which of course is a very, very gross thing. You think of that similarly maybe to like the dirty cop who threatens to plant coke on you if you don't give him a bribe. No, like really, really gross. And he comes in and he just says, God, have mercy on me. I know I'm a sinner. And then Jesus completely shocks the people he's talking to by saying that, you know what, it was the tax collector and not the Pharisee who really won the day, because when you exalt yourself, you'll be humbled, but when you humble yourself, you'll be exalted. And so some of us, there's no question this is still alive and at work in some of us here who really are a little bit more like the Pharisee. Here's what's helpful about this is I think as much as we don't want to see this in ourselves, because we kind of all agree it's really pretty gross, I think if we really look, this is a little bit easier to see. in ourselves. You might want to dress it up as righteous zeal for God or anger at sin or something like that. But the real truth in your heart, and I can't see your heart, but you can, so you don't even worry about it. This is just, it's everything, it's all between you and God, right? The real truth in your heart is that you're kind of disgusted by some other people, and you don't just feel like you're forgiven, you feel like you kind of are better. I think there's no question that still exists in people and in the world and in us here today. However, if you've spent any time in church or studying Scripture, there's a pretty good chance that you've come across this maybe multiple times, and we all know how it ends. Even if you didn't know how this one ended, if you've been around a little bit, you've probably at some point picked up that when Jesus is telling a parable with a Pharisee, that usually ends up being the bad guy, and whoever the other person is ends up being the good guy. And this was really completely shocking when Jesus is speaking these in real time, right? They hadn't read Luke chapter 18. It hadn't been written yet. And so this is part of why they're great stories. But we knew the end from the beginning, at least hope for most, maybe many of us here today, certainly before today. And so we go in kind of identifying with the tax collector. And so now we go and we maybe don't actually pray this. We maybe don't actually think this, but we kind of do think this. We say, God, thank you so much that you didn't make me like that terrible, hypocritical, self-righteous Pharisee. He thinks he's so much better than the rest of us, but he's not. In fact, I think the pastor just said that spiritual pride, that's like the worst kind of pride. Thank you, I'm not like that. And now, despite our best efforts to be the exact opposite, we are the Pharisee, and we have no idea it even happened. Because pride is so subtle, and it has a way of creeping in, and maybe, or maybe not, but maybe even everybody else around us can see it, and we have no idea that it's there. So look, I know this is a really hard topic, because this is all of us. This isn't this impacts some of us message. This is a one way or another, on one level or another. This is every single one of us, but it is so destructive. It is so ugly. It is so deceptive. I just want to ask you, will you look into your heart? Will you check that black box and see what you find and know that I'm fighting this in my life the same way that I hope you are all also. And so how do I know if this is me? Well, I would like to think that I can give a little bit of help this morning, but I will give the warning that the more this might be you, probably the less you're going to like it. Because there are some of us probably who are sitting here, and I don't have to say a word. As soon as you say the word pride, show the first parable, you're saying, oh no, this is me. I know this is me. I hate this in myself. I try so hard to kill it, but I'm never completely able to do it. I know I've got to get off of the P ride. I have some work to do, and I'll bet you do. But it's probably not nearly as bad as you think. I'll bet you are not nearly as high up on that tower as you would believe yourself to be. I'll bet you're seeing the last tattered remnants of pride in your heart, and you're disgusted by that, and I'm really not so concerned about you. Here's who I'm more concerned about. Is if fun amusement park ride illustrations notwithstanding, you thought this was a great message. And in fact, you've been amening every point along the way as you think about somebody else. I'm so glad that my husband is hearing this. Somebody needed to knock him off of his high horse. Oh, I blew it. Ross had said to bring people I know to church, and I almost did it. I almost brought Nancy from the office, right? Because she's always so judgmental and so arrogant. I wish that she would have been here to say this. I missed it. I blew it. Listen, the truth is, if that's you, it's probably a lot more in you than it is in them. Kind of similarly, but a little bit different. How quickly do you see and how deeply are you bothered by pride in other people? The more you detect it and the more deeply you are bothered by it is more likely that it's really in you is where the problem is. I know you don't believe that, but let me say this, and I think you're going to agree. Really, truly humble people aren't nearly that bothered by the pride or arrogance in somebody else. I bet that's true. So pride leads to disgrace. It goes before destruction. It ends in humiliation. Whatever it is, where you have some unhealthy pride in your life, here's what it is. You are taking credit for. It might be really good, but it's not really your credit. It's from God. Get off the P ride. It only goes down. So one of the great things about this series, at least in my opinion, is we haven't just been pointing out problems. We've been working to offer real life solutions to help make things better, to stop crashing, to get off of the P ride before all of the destruction and the disgrace comes, right? But here's a problem, is this was kind of a lot today. We're out of time. What do you think the solution to that is? You're going to have to come back next week. Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you so much that you give us so much. That you have looked on each and every one of us with so much favor and so much love and so much goodness. And that I'm sorry, sometimes we have this tendency, maybe all of the times we have this tendency to turn what should be praise and thanks to you into a very, very ugly pride that we so often don't even realize or recognize is in our hearts. And still praying, if you're here today, and maybe that's exactly what's been in between you and God, or maybe it's something else completely different. Maybe you don't even know what it is, but you know that really what you need to do, regardless of pride or anything else, is you need forgiveness and a relationship with the God who created you and loves you, and that is available to you today. I don't know if this is bad news, but part of the bad news is one of the very entry points to following Jesus is recognizing that we are not enough. We are not good enough, that every one of us has sin in our lives. There's nothing we can do to erase it or make up for it or pretend that it didn't happen. But the good news is that's why Jesus came, lived a sinless life, died in our place, in your place, in my place on the cross, satisfying justice for our wrongdoing, for your wrongdoing. And if that's you, that can stand as justice before the holy and righteous and just God for our wrongdoing, your wrongdoing. If this is you, just right where you sit, you can pray out loud or in your heart, say, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so that I could be forgiven and be adopted as a child in your family. Please come into my life. Forgive me and adopt me. Begin to make me into the person you created me to be, and give me the life that you have for me. It's not the words of the prayer that saves you, it's that you put your faith in Jesus. God's grace comes to you. Through that, you are forgiven in a new spiritual creation will you please do the best thing that you can do from here is to let somebody know. If you're here in person, go out to the point. That's just the corner in the lobby when we're done. There'll be someone there, let them know the decision you made. They'll take your information. We'll be able to follow up with you. If you're online, send us a message. It'll be the same. For those of us who, we've been following Jesus, but man, if you don't think pride is a problem for you, maybe you're just further along and more mature than I can imagine. That is certainly possible. But I suspect this is every one of us. Will we look into our hearts? Will we see it? Will we recognize that? I know it's gross. I know you don't want to do it. But this is the way forward. Will you look at it? Will you see it? Will you recognize it? Will you open your heart to God to let him in to deal with this, to come back next week, or honestly, you all know what the solution is going to be, and to seek and to search for real humility and to eliminate the unhealthy pride from our lives. Father, we need you to do this. We ask for your supernatural Spirit to be working in our hearts. We ask you to come, to give you the freedom to work in us and to work along with you, to make us into the people who you have created us to be, looking at and loving and serving you in love and humility. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Hey, Life Point.